Going from being an individual contributor to a manager can be a daunting transition. And even if you've been a manager for years, it's not always easy to know if you have truly embraced that manager mindset. And that's why I spoke with today's guest, who specializes in just that. Today's guest is Eric Girard. Eric is CEO of Girard Training Solutions and author of Lead Like a Pro, the essential guide for new managers. He has over 30 years of experience helping improve the performance of managers and employees. He specializes in the development of new managers, focusing on their successful transition into their new role and on the team management skills that they need to be successful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Eric. Super psyched to have you. I just finished reading your book and there's just so much that new managers need help with. And I'm glad that I found a kindred spirit in you of someone who is trying to help new managers be successful in this role that so many of them get thrown into without expectations of and without the support and without the training that they really need to thrive. So thanks for coming.
Oh, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you.
So why don't we start with, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges that new managers face? So when they're first promoted or they, get a new job and manager is in their title, what are some of the first challenges that they run into in this new kind of role?
In my experience, what I see happening a lot is a new manager will get promoted. So for example, I was promoted over my team. I worked in a team of 3 and then I was promoted over them. Or folks come in and it's like, hey, congratulations, now you're a manager. And in my case, and what I see happening in other people's cases, is they don't make that psychological transition, that transformation from I was an individual contributor paid to perform tasks to I am now a manager responsible for getting results through people. And a lot of folks want to kind of fall back to what they were good at, right? So, I was a great program manager, so I kept falling back into my program manager role and ignored my team to my detriment and to theirs. That's probably number one, is folks are like, well, listen, I was a great financial analyst or I was a great engineer. That's what got me promoted. So I'm going to double down on that. And that causes real problems with the team.
Oh my gosh. I feel like that's not just for new managers. That's the problem that so many managers continue to face in an ongoing way when there's so much safety that comes from doing the thing that you're good at. And now you're not supposed to do that thing, but it's really hard. It's really hard not to. I'm wondering, specifically related to this kind of mindset shift, what's getting in the way of kind of entering and saying, okay, now I have to be responsible for these people, right? Is there something that you can pinpoint or just unpack that's are we not, I don't know, why aren't we just jumping into the new manager roles and be like, great, I have a team now. This is wonderful. I have all these people who will do all the work for me.
Well, what I see happening a lot is folks will say, look, I can do it faster and I can do it better if I just do it myself. And so there's a fantastic article by the Harvard Business Review called Who's Got the Monkey? And it was published in 1974, I believe, and then republished in the 90s. So it's got real staying power. And in it, the authors say, imagine that your team, your direct reports are walking around and they've got a squawking monkey sitting on their shoulder. And it needs to be fed and taken care of, and all the things that you have to do with a living creature, and they don't want it anymore. So they walk up to you and they say, hey, I've got this problem. Will you help me with it? And then they hand the monkey to you. By the end of the day, your team is able to go home scot-free, no worries, because they've handed off all their tasks to you and you're laden down with 20 screeching monkeys. So my mantra for that is accept no monkeys. Don't take other people's problems. Just because you are an expert in financial analysis or whatever it is, doesn't mean that you need to be the dispenser of all wisdom regarding that. Learning how to be a good coach and learning how to ask questions to get people thinking on their own is hugely important for new managers and experienced managers alike. Say, well, what would you do if I wasn't here? Chances are when you throw the ball back in their court like that, not to mix metaphors, but when you hand the monkey back and say, what would you do if I wasn't here? Chances are your team member knows what to do, or they have a decent idea and you can work off of that. rather than just letting them hand you the monkey and now they're completely rid of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. What a fabulous metaphor. And it really reinforces that, right? Just because we have expertise and we may even enjoy doing that work. And as you said, feel like we can do it faster and we can just jump right in and solve the problem and put out the fire, that we have these team members who are handing us their problems and we might be inclined to accept them because we think that's what managers are supposed to do. And what you're saying is like, no, that's not your job. Your job is not to fix their problems, to jump in and save the day and to get your hands into the work and take it over. But your job is to coach them so that they can get the job done. That's like so helpful. Okay, so what do we do then to help coach? Because that's not a skill that most of us have had practice doing or have training in. So what does it really mean to coach someone to be able to navigate their own challenges?
For coaching, I love the GROW model. So GROW is a really common acronym. It stands for goals, reality, options, and way forward, or what will you do? And so this can be used in a couple of different directions. So let's say you as my employee come to me and say, hey, I've got this problem. I can't figure out this data. What should I do about it? Then I can start saying, hey, let's talk about it. So you want to talk about this data that you're having trouble with. How are things right now? So what's the reality of the situation? What have you already tried? What options, have you tried, or what could you do? And then after you have that discussion, you realize, oh, wait, we need to go back and revise the goal. So you can go backwards. The GROW model is not linear, but you eventually get through goals, reality, options, and way forward. And the way forward is the action plan for the employee to go get the thing done. So I would use the GROW model first. Secondly, I would ask the good journalistic questions that we grew up with in school. Who, what, when, where, why, how. So just asking lots of really good open-ended questions. And then lastly, I would encourage every budding coach or even experienced coach to read Michael Bungay-Stanier's book, The Coaching Habit. Fantastic book. He comes up with 7 questions that can be used in any order to move a coaching conversation along so that you don't wind up walking around with 20 monkeys on your back.
I love that. And I want to give an extra support for that book. It's fabulous, fabulous insights in there and very practical. Okay, so we are shifting from don't take anybody monkeys, don't take their monkeys, let them hold their own monkeys, coach them through it so they know how to handle it. Accept no monkeys. That's like the number one thing. Take that away, everyone who's listening. Accept no monkeys. Okay, so we're coaching people through challenges. What's another one of the skill sets that we or mindset shifts that we need to take on to really live well in this new role called manager?
Another thing I talk about in my book is how important delegation is. And it goes hand in hand with what we just talked about. So not only are we not accepting any monkeys, we're not accepting any new tasks, but we're also thinking thoughtfully about who can I delegate to? And it may not be the person who has the most expertise. It may be the person who needs to develop in this area. Or it might be the person who I can trust to make good decisions, who might have almost zero expertise, but will make good decisions. So you can develop your team by delegating, and you can do yourself a huge favor and actually go home at 5 or knock off at 5 by delegating off things that you like. And there's real grieving that comes with this as well. Because, for example, when I started Girard Training Solutions, I was going to be a solopreneur. I was going to do all the things. I was going to design, develop, deliver the programs. I was going to create the custom slide decks. I was going to do the facilitation. I would do the business development and the sales and all the things, right? And one of the things I really enjoyed was playing with my website. And I loved tinkering with that thing, but it got too much. And I started making mistakes and kind of messing it up. And so the first thing I did was hire an old friend of mine who I worked with 15 years ago and asked her if she would be my webmaster. And not only did she knock it out of the park as a webmaster, but she also has a significant background in graphic design and instructional design. So she's been getting more and more work, which is good for her pocketbook. And it's also good for my sanity. So you can develop people, delegate small and then grow over time as people earn your trust and show you what they can do, and your life gets better. So that's the next thing I would really focus on is delegation.
Oh my gosh. And delegation, it's so tricky. And I actually had a very similar experience with my own journey as a solo into entrepreneur, wanting to do everything because I liked it all and I thought I could do it all, and then realizing that I couldn't do it all. And that sometimes the things that we like doing are not necessarily the best use of our time. And that when you delegate, right, you free up your time to do the things that are unique for you, and you let somebody else do something that maybe you could do it better, but they can also do it perfectly fine. And that's actually okay. That was a hard lesson for me to learn. And I feel like with delegation, right, it's scary. You just talked about the trust piece of it. Can you say a little more about how managers can, especially if you're new into a team and so you don't have long-standing relationships, you don't know what your team members' skill sets are, to kind of build that trust so that you can delegate and not micromanage and not worry and not jump in all the time, and really truly like delegate effectively?
The trick to building trust is to build relationship in my point of view. So if you want to trust somebody, you need to get to know them. So there's knowing and liking people, so that you then eventually trust them. And so I love Patrick Lencioni's book, The Five Dysfunctions of a Team. I use that as a source in my book, and really spending some time thinking about how can I get to know these people on beyond just a surface level, beyond just the, name, rank, serial number kind of level. So asking, really deep questions around who are these people and where are they from and what matters to them and what's important to them, digging deep into their background, so learning more about where they came from and how they grew up in their field. You can do that individually. You can do that in a group setting. You can do fun things that are kind of low stakes, like bowling is a great equalizer because, there might be one person who actually knows how to bowl. The rest of the team is there just for laughs. So if you go to a decent bowling alley that's got like food and other distractions and things like that, you can quote bowl, but really you're there to hang out and get to know each other a little bit. And so there's food and there's drinks and people are talking. That's a great way to break down barriers. So little things like that don't cost a lot, that aren't complicated, can go a long way. And then finding ways to recognize people as well. So early in the career, early in your career as a manager, find ways to catch people doing something right and call that out. And do something. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. It could be just a handwritten thank you note or a $10 Starbucks gift card. It doesn't have to be that big of a deal. So for example, let me tell you a story about how one of my managers started off with a really small, inexpensive thing to recognize us. And it turned into something bigger than he had really ever imagined. Do you want to hear the story? So
Yes, absolutely.
In 2000, I'm going to say 2003, Jeff took over our team. Our team had been beaten up pretty badly by the previous manager. And so he was working really hard to kind of rebuild our sense of worth and self-esteem. And one day he walks into our weekly meeting. We had a weekly staff meeting. He walks in and is carrying this little stuffed gorilla, this little black stuffed gorilla. And we're like, Jeff, what's with the gorilla? He says, everybody, I'd like you to meet Stanley. Stanley is going to be our totem, and we will compete for Stanley. So every week I will check my email and see who of your internal customers, because we're all an internal training team, who of your internal customers was surprised or delighted or thrilled with something you did. And if I hear about it, then I will award Stanley to you for the week. And you can show off Stanley, and it's kind of like a big deal to us. We know that if you got Stanley, you did something good. And it'll just be something we pass around to kind of keep that sense of esprit de corps kind of going in our team. So I said, okay, fine, I'm going to get Stanley as much as I can. So I really worked hard to delight my customers. I had Stanley a lot, and he would sit on my bookshelf and greet people as they came into my office. And, having Stanley was not guaranteed. Like he wasn't passed around in a circle. Like you had to earn Stanley. So we were all like working really hard to delight our customers to earn Stanley. So fast forward a little bit, I've had Stanley a few times. My team members have had Stanley a few times, and I was diagnosed with metastatic testicular cancer, and it almost killed me. So I'm in Stanford Medical Center in Stanford, California. I'm in a hospital room. Jeff comes in. He's holding Stanley. He says, the team and I talked, and we want you to have Stanley permanently. So in my drug-addled state, I'm gorked up with all kinds of meds. All I could do is I'm lying back on the pillow, and I go, Stanley, and then I fall back asleep. But when I woke up, Stanley was in the room. So Stanley stuck with me for years, and I took him to different jobs, and he always had a pride of place. And then I put him away. Fast forward again, I get married and I have twins. And when they hit about 3, I brought Stanley out and I told the story of Stanley and how important he was. And the girls just glommed on to Stanley, and they made him clothes, and they played with him all the time. And so they played with him for years, and we still have him. He's put away in our storage area, and we'll pull him out when it's time for them to hand him off to their kids. So go all the way back to the beginning. Jeff probably spent $15 on this stupid stuffed gorilla, right? And now think about all the lives that Stanley has touched, and how much he meant. So if you can go and come up with a tradition or something that costs very little or no money, that means something genuine to your people, then that's a great way to build trust. It's a great way to build respect and esprit de corps, and get your team performing really quickly.
I love Stanley. I love the idea of Stanley. And it feels like it hits on so many of the pieces that teams need, right? Like there's the element of appreciation, right? Recognition for someone who has delivered, kind of not necessarily hugely above and beyond, but really like done what you all are aiming to do. And that's awesome. And then there's this element of culture building, right? Like Stanley now means something unique to your team that is really special and gives you something to bond over, which is to that trust piece and the relationships piece, which is so beautiful. I love that. I'm like, how do we do a virtual Stanley? Is there a way that we can
there's got to be a way.
Not all co-located?
Yeah, there's absolutely got to be a way.
There must be. I want to shift a little bit because you talked about, mostly what we've been talking about so far is really like as an individual. And I know in your book, you talk about the stages of team formation. And I feel like that, in my experience, is like another area where managers get really stuck because they're not only responsible now for their own work, the one-on-ones they have directly, right, the relationship they have with each individual and trying to really support and optimize that individual, but also now this group that they have to manage of multiple people who have their own relationships and their own interactions. And can you talk a little bit about the approach for kind of managing the group of people that managers are now responsible for too?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would love to. Bruce Tuckman in the 50s, I think it was 1956, wrote an article where he laid out what we now know as the Tuckman model of team development. And for my book, I actually dove into the archives and found the original article. So this thing, is, imagine a scholarly article written in the 50s. It's pretty interesting reading. But he talks about 4 stages. And when I'm done saying them, you'll already understand the model. So a team goes through 4 typical stages: forming, storming, norming, performing. And then in the 70s, he came up with a 5th stage called adjourning, but I stick with just the core 4. So you already understand what this model means, right? So you've got a team that's coming together. They're excited. They're ready to go, but they don't know what they don't know. They're forming. Then the personalities start to clash, people's personalities and work style preferences. And this is the way we need to do it. Now, this is the way we need to do it. And maybe I don't like you so much. There's storming. A manager's job is to manage through storming, to let the team know, hey, this is going to happen. You can share this with your team. This is going to happen. When we get to storming, it's okay. We're just not going to park there. We're going to keep moving. Then the team starts to crawl out of that trough and starts to perform a little bit better. They start to get along a little bit better. Now they're norming. And then when they're hitting on all cylinders, everything is humming along, the team is performing. And the good news is the team is rocking it by this point. It may take a little while to get there, but they finally do just start to knock it out of the park. That's the good news. The bad news is that teams that are performing often get poached. So that's just something to watch out for as a manager. It's like, how do you keep your high performers? Well, there's 2 schools of thought. The first is some managers will want to keep their high performers on their team and not let them leave. Great managers will groom their high performers to go off and do new things, start new teams, go do new stuff. And then you continue the cycle of building these high performers, letting them go through the 4 stages. So that's just a high level overview. Do you want to go deeper into any of those, or what would you like to do?
Yeah, I would actually love if you have any practical tips or tricks for kind of how to spot. We kind of talked a little bit about how to spot what stage you're in, especially, I mean, my experience has been like it's not so linear, right? And so, like, you can kind of be going into different stages at different moments because things change in the environment, things change on your team, right? So, kind of how do you spot what stage you're in? And then, what are some of the tips and tricks for navigating through that stage so that you don't get stuck in storming forever and you can really get from norming into high performing and not kind of get lost in the norming processes, et
Yep.
cetera.
Yeah. So with forming, we're looking at two things. We're looking at competence and commitment. A team's level of competence, how well they can do the thing, do the task, and commitment, how committed each person is to actually getting it done. So in forming, you'll spot a team that's informing where they're all pretty excited. So their commitment to the team is usually pretty high, but they don't know what they don't know. So their competence is fairly low. But they're like, okay, new team, new opportunity, let's get it done. So typically their commitment is fairly high. Then we get into storming. We're building competence. So that's actually coming up because we're starting to understand what the work is and how we need to get it done. So the team is fairly competent at this point, but their commitment is down at its lowest point because they're aggravated, they're irritated. So that's what I would be looking for is what's the sentiment of the team. Then as we go into norming, both competence and commitment are coming up. They're not at their highest points, but they're definitely coming up. Commitment especially is on the upswing. And so this is where the team is starting to gel a little bit. Okay. They're not doing as well as you would like yet, but they're certainly a lot better than they were 2 weeks ago when they were storming. And then finally, performing, boom. Both items are high competence, high commitment. So those are just some snapshots you can be looking for. And then ways to manage, especially managing through storming, is to let people know, first off, what to expect. So explain the model to them. I would encourage you to share the whole model with them and say, okay, this is what we can expect to have happen. And letting people vent, letting people talk privately, I think is useful. I'm really frustrated and really aggravated with X. Let people vent and that's okay. And then also let them know, like, okay, so let's use our coaching skills and let's ask questions. What can you do about that? Because I'm not taking that monkey from you. But what can you do about it in order to move on to the next thing? How can you help solve the problem? How can you be part of the solution? It's okay that you feel this way, and I'm going to let you be this way for a little while, but you need to come up with a solution and an answer to it.
I love that. I love that once again, it's like, don't take the monkey and coach people through it. Just a recurring thing of, as a manager, there's gonna be lots of monkeys coming your way and you just don't let them get transferred.
If I'm overdoing it on the monkeys and the coaching, let me know.
No, I love it. And I think like these are the kinds of things that like the visual model of the monkey, plus of course, Stanley, right? Like show appreciation, make sure that you're giving praise, right? Like we have our two monkeys. We have the monkeys that we need to give, the gorillas we need to give, and the monkeys that we need to not take. So I think it's a fabulous mental image that you're creating for us right here. With this storming, norming, right? We were just kind of saying that like, at least my experience again has been that it's so iterative because you have a new team member come in and you were high performing and now you're kind of like, we got to figure out what's going on with this person, right? Or you have a person leave or something changes out in the context of the business and now your goals have been shifted. And so you've got to do some different things than you thought you were doing. And it can kind of throw people off. And I feel like that gets into the responsibility around managing change that you also talk about in your book. So could you maybe tell us a little bit about kind of what is our role and how do we help our teams through some of those disruptive moments and really support the change that's happening?
I would absolutely say that change is really important to be good at as a manager. And it's something that you want to master quickly, the ability to spot where you're at personally in the change curve and where your team is. So I talk about two different models in my classes, and you get to pick your favorite. So I'm going to explain both of them, and you pick the one you like. The bridges change model is simpler, and it's as simple as saying, okay, there is an ending. So something is ending, And people tend to resist endings. They don't like letting go of the unknown. They don't like letting go of the known. So imagine a trapeze and they're hanging on and everything is fine. And then they come into the neutral zone and they let go of that trapeze and they're flying toward the next one, but they can't see the next one yet. And so that neutral zone is a very uncomfortable spot to be. And this is where people tend to freak out a little bit. It's like, the known is gone and the next thing isn't here yet. And I don't like this. So that tends to get very, very wonky for people. And then beginnings is where we can see when things are starting to get complete. The change is starting to become complete. We start to feel better about how things are going. We start to get into new routines, new rhythms. And so the old stuff is past, the past is complete, and now we are on to moving forward in this new paradigm that we're in. So the bridges change model is endings, neutral zone, and beginnings. Then we've got the Kubler-Ross change curve, which is based on Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work on grief and death and dying. But I use a much greatly simplified version of that, where we have denial, resistance, exploration, and commitment. And again, just like with the previous model that I mentioned, because I said this 4 things, now you have an idea of how the model works. So we've got people denying that the change is going to affect them, denying that it's going to work. Resistance, because humans resist change. We're wired for consistency, and humans often don't like change. Exploration was like, well, maybe I could try. They dip their toe in the pool of this new thing that's coming. And then finally commitment, where they're like, okay, I'm bought in. And just like with the Tuckman model, I would say share this model with your team, explain it, say this is going to happen and it's okay. And you're allowed to vent. You're allowed to be upset for a little bit. Just don't park there. So that's another recurring theme for you. You're allowed to get irritated at this change that's coming along. Let's just go into a quiet room by ourselves and you can talk it through. And then I'll ask you some questions to see how we can move you along. So if you had to pick one of those 2 models, which one would you prefer?
I love them both. I don't know. Why do I need to pick? Can I use them both?
It's actually, I'm kind of doing a little market testing here right now, because as it turns out, in some of my classes, folks are like, I'm overwhelmed. There's too many models. Like I use a lot of models. And so one of the easiest places to trim is to trim back one of the 2 change models. But if you think they're both good, I'll leave them. Anybody asks, I'll say,
I like them both.
Okay, Mamie said that they're both good.
I like them both for different reasons, right? I think the emotional experience of grief and through to commitment or resistance to commitment is super helpful as a manager to think about the emotional experience that someone is going through that can be completely irrational, right? Like the change could be a really good change, and still most people are going to go through some variation of that change curve. And you need to be empathetic towards that. You need to be receptive of that. And you can't expect people, especially if you as a manager have been brought into a process earlier and you kind of have had time to get to a place where you feel good about the change, to now expect that your colleagues immediately are going to jump to that same point that you are without having the time to process it. So I feel like that's such an important mental model or framework. And then the bridge model, right, I think is also really important in that we are having to let go, right? Any change, and even good changes, you have to let go of what was the past, right? This is a departure from that shoreline. And when you're on the bridge, right, you're in a place that is unknown and uncomfortable. You're not yet where you're going to be. And you're also not yet on the solid ground from where you were. And that is its own journey that people have to traverse. And I think that acknowledging that experience of the kind of messy middle phase is also really important as a manager. And then, once you get to the other shoreline, right, now things can get settled down as you're discovering, and that's its own thing. So I like them for different reasons, because they give managers different kinds of ways of thinking about what it is that their team members are experiencing and what it is that they need to do to help support their teams. So, all right, all of that being said, we have to wrap up. So can you please tell us about a great manager that you worked for and what made this person such a fabulous boss?
Yeah. So I've already mentioned Jeff, but before Jeff was Brent. Brent was my first remote manager ever, and he was my first ever manager in Silicon Valley in 1999. And he lived about 3 hours away from headquarters where I was working. So he worked in an office south of me and would come up every week or two to check in and all of that. He did a couple of things that were pretty good. I mean, the first is he onboarded me in person. So he made sure that he was in the office showing me around and introducing me to people and getting me oriented. So that was in person. And then during the week, in between visits, he was on the phone with me several times a day. So this is before Slack and all of that. But he would just pick up the phone and call me. Hey, how's it going? How you doing? Not to look over my shoulder, not to micromanage, but genuinely, like, I'm just curious. How are you doing? Because I sat right outside the door of his boss. So he wanted to make sure she wasn't running roughshod over me. But it was a great way to build relationship because we would chat 5-10 minutes. How's it going? How's things? What's going on? And it was really, it worked really well to build relationships so that then when he would come up to visit, we could chit chat for a couple of minutes and then just sit down and go to work and work on whatever project we were working on that week. So that was a great thing that he did. But here's something that made him stand out. In 2001, my mom was diagnosed with metastatic lung cancer. So a little cancer in my family. So my mom had lung cancer. And of course, I needed to be with her at the hospital. So Brent's like, okay, shoo, go to the hospital. So I would go to the hospital, but then I would come back to work. And then Brent would shoo me away, like, stop that, go be with your mom. And then I would come back, like I was in deep denial. And I just kept coming back to work thinking that would help somehow. So he sat me down and said, look, you need to be with your mother. You need to be with your family. Go be with them. We got work. We got you. Don't worry about it. Leave your laptop at home. We got you. Okay. So I went back to the hospital and I stayed there. And my sister and I were the only ones in the room when she finally passed. And that was a huge blow. It was very, very difficult, very emotional. And Brent caught wind of that and he says, okay, you do what you need to do. Don't worry about work. We got it. Then he sends out an email to the entire team, which was fairly large, sends out an email to the whole team and says, hey, Eric Girard's mother just passed. Let's please lean in and help out to pick up his task so that he doesn't have to worry about it. And I'd really appreciate it if you'd say a little prayer for him. So he didn't do a lot. He didn't say a lot, mainly it was shooing me away. And then a quick 5-minute conversation to keep me at the hospital. And then a quick 3-line email. But that meant so much to me that years later, like that was in 1999 and it's 2024 and Brent's still very important to me. So those are the kind of things that great managers do is they fly air cover for their team. They show genuine care and empathy, and they do everything they can to help you manage life so that you can, when you come back to work, you're ready to go. So I think the world of Brent, and I hope that everybody experiences a manager like him at one point in their career.
Amen. He sounds amazing.
Yeah.
And where can people now learn more about you and get a copy of your book?
Yeah. So you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm Eric P. Girard on LinkedIn. My website is girardtrainingsolutions.com. And my book, Lead Like a Pro, The Essential Guide for New Managers, is on Amazon.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Eric. So fun to talk with you today. And just thanks for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.